Welcome to Cravings Control for Fat Loss. I'm your host, Laura Cavallo, former sugar binger, overeater, and yo-yo dieter turned fat loss and cravings coach for hundreds of busy women. Here at Cravings Control for Fat Loss, I'll be sharing mindset, movement, and metabolism strategies for those who are ready to ditch the fat diet cycle and slim down without counting calories, tracking points, or giving up any of the foods they love. Get ready to embrace progress over perfection, grace over guilt, and bring curiosity and learning to the inevitable ups and downs of your life. Expect a decrease in your cravings while seeing and feeling an improvement in how you look, how you feel, and your overall quality of life. I am so excited you're here, boo. Let's get started. Welcome to today's episode, and I am so excited because I have a very special guest who has been a mentor and coach to me for nearly 10 years. I first learned about Jill Coleman when I became a trainer in 2014 and worked at Equinox in Santa Monica, California. From there, I followed her on social media, and she is the person responsible for introducing me to the idea of moderate eating, and that you can still be fit, athletic, and in shape without an all-or-nothing approach to diet or exercise. Her teachings piqued my curiosity enough that I began learning about hormones, female metabolism, nutrition, and cravings more in depth, and that's how I started the journey towards becoming a cravings and fat loss coach. Give a listen, and if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. So hi, Jill. Welcome in. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
I am so excited to talk all things nutrition because usually you and I talk business, so this is going to be really fun.
I know. And I have to say, I am truly honored to have you. I really value and appreciate your time. And this is like a starstruck moment for me, I'm going to say, admittedly, because, and we'll go into this, like, I've known you since 2014. You know, I first saw you at Equinox Santa Monica when I first became a trainer. And me and my friend Molly saw you lifting. And I told you this recently. And I was like, who is that badass? Like, we need to find out. We need to be part of her crew. And you were like, you know, deadlifting some ridiculous amount. And so we started following you. And then you started talking more about moderation in those coming years. And I've told you this before, you've been the catalyst for my change in nutrition and health and just getting healthier overall, right? And so to be working with you in business more specifically, but also having you be my mentor and inspiration behind the nutrition and mindset side of things, I'm like, this, I'm like,
it's been so cool.
It's been so cool. And I'm like, if nothing happens after this podcast, everything will have been good because I got to interview Jill Coleman.
I love that Equinox story too, because honestly, I was there for a year and I really like Equinox from like the, you know, the amenities side of things. I never did classes or anything, but that was like actually the reason why I ended up leaving is I was like, God, there's like no women here lifting at any sort of weight. Like, I mean, there were women, but there's more people on like cardio and stuff like that. And I was like, I just don't know this is my vibe.
Yeah.
You're scaring people.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you go to a gym, like where people are serious about training and serious about their training process and improving themselves beyond just getting small, right? They want to get stronger, they want to perform, or they want a community. You go to certain places for that, right? And
totally. Yeah. And so I think I went to Gold's Gym Venice, which is like the mecca of bodybuilding after that.
Yeah. Like the total opposite of Equinox.
Yeah, I was like the skinniest, smallest person in that gym.
Yeah, I know.
Even I was intimidated walking into that gym the first time.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, funny story. I've never worked out at Gold's before. I've walked in, I've done a tour in like a full like dress because I was going to dinner in Venice, but like I've never worked out there. And I'm like, I lived there for 7 years.
I know, that's so funny.
Yeah, Equinox had the good
I was there
steam
for the sauna.
room.
And also I was also new. I had just moved from North Carolina. I didn't know anybody. And I joined like 3 gyms in like the first like month because I was like, well, I CrossFit gym, I got the Equinox gym. I was there just like, you know, scoping for dudes. Like it was fun.
Yeah. It's LA. It's so fun. So you talked about moving just quickly. You mentioned moving from South Carolina to LA. And South Carolina is really where I guess you tell us, right? Because I know a lot about you, but our listeners don't. So let's start from the beginning. What was your relationship experience with food as an adolescent and into high school as an athlete? How did your family talk about food and nutrition? And how did that impact you as you got older?
I am really blessed because I grew up in a household where like food really wasn't like front and center. I think I talked to a lot of clients and, people with the nutrition stuff. We have a concept called Moderation 365 at JillFit. And a lot of our clients grew up with parents constantly talking about the food, talking about their weight, really making food, kind of putting food on a pedestal. That was actually not my experience at all. My mom was a single mom for a long time. She worked full time. And I was an athlete growing up. I was one of those people who just like fell in love with exercise really early. So my only relationship with food was you eat so you can perform better. And so I was that person who was like, oh, I love the carb now. You got to carb up before your races and stuff like that. So for me, it was more just that I saw food as fuel. And I never had to worry about what I was eating. So like most kids, I would eat junk food and packaged food, especially with a mom that was a full-time single parent, like TV dinners and stuff like that growing up. But I never fixated it on it so much. And I remember being in high school and girls were getting eating disorders, and that was just never on my radar. Ironically, it wasn't actually until I did my first fitness competition when I was 24 years old that I really started paying attention to nutrition. Up until that point, I was just someone who loved to train and I just ate so I could fuel my exercise. And I was teaching at tons of classes. I was a personal trainer. And when I decided to do my first figure competition when I was 24 years old, I was like, well, I guess I have to figure out nutrition. So I like really loved the idea of learning about it. And I'm sure you work with a lot of people who they go, oh, wow, I can really control how I look based on how I eat. And I sort of fell in love with that process. To me, as someone who is sort of a recovering perfectionist / control freak, right? I definitely pride myself on taking responsibility and ownership. Something about being able to control what you eat in order to control what you look like was very attractive to me. And so I ended up training for this show, learning a ton about nutrition. I ended up losing about 20 pounds over the course of about 5 months, doing things that I would definitely not recommend anyone do, like slashing carbs and stuff like that, to get up on stage. And that process for me was so transformative in many ways, not only because I saw my body how I'd never seen it before, right? I was always around the same weight and always active, and I had that like athlete build. When I was really lean in like quote unquote show shape, I was getting compliments, I was getting affirmation. People were like, wow, you're working really hard. When's your show? And to be honest with you, I got addicted to the attention. I think a lot of times this happens when people have a massive body change. Either one of two things happen. They get addicted to that affirmation. So they feel this constant pressure to have to constantly be that, have that look or have that leanness, or they self-sabotage because they go, wow, like now I'm on the hook to stay here. We see that a lot with our clients that lose massive amounts of weight. They lose 50 pounds, 70 pounds, 100 pounds, and they gain it all back because now they're just too visible. So there's almost like a fear of success happening. For me, it was the first bucket of like, I got off stage. I actually won my show. My entire family was there. My friends were there. It was like the most amazing night of my life. I got off stage and immediately started binging. And I know now that it's not quote unquote my fault. But back then I felt just weak and undisciplined. And I gained back 15 pounds of the 20 within like 2 weeks. And I didn't recognize my body. I was bloated. I was just inflamed. And the compliments weren't there anymore, right? No one's giving me affirmation. And then I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm wearing like men's large Hanes t-shirts out in the community because I'm like, oh, if someone knows me and they see me, they saw me in show shape 2 weeks ago. And so the only thing that I knew to do was sign up for another show and do another show, have to get lean again, get the affirmation back. And so that sort of sent me on this 6-year roller coaster of what I call the deprive, then binge cycle. And of course it got better over time, but at that point my body wasn't responding like it, once did. And so it really took me about like 6 full years of getting to that point of complete food, body obsession, exercise obsession to want to actually change things. And it was really scary to look at moderation, mindfulness, look at some of these addictive behaviors. It's one of those things where if you have ever worked with someone or you're listening to this and you are that someone, that sort of addictive behavior, that obsessive behavior, neurotic behavior sort of just creeps up slowly. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, wow, why am I doing 2 hours of cardio? Why am I cutting all carbs? And the stuff's not even working anymore. And so you have to have that very real conversation with yourself and also take the sort of blame and shame and embarrassment and all those kind of things out of it and just really look at what are the facts and do I want to stay here in this misery or do I want to figure out another solution?
Yeah, and your competition was really the first experience of dieting and training, to your point of changing your body, right? And that's the only thing you
Yep.
knew except being an athlete, right? And like eating as much as you could and performing.
Totally. And I think, for athletes, they grow up, and we see this a lot with our clients who are maybe really elite athletes, like they're college level athletes, and they've just eaten whatever they've wanted forever and ever and ever. And then when they stop training and they stop doing the amount of exercise that they were doing, they're still eating the same way. And they're going, wow, like I literally don't know how to eat
Yeah.
normally. And that's sort of how I felt at the end of that, like 6 years of kind of binge and deprive. I was like, I don't know what to buy at the grocery store. Like, what does moderation even look like? What is that? I only knew deprive. I only knew extremes, right? I only knew like I'm either on or I'm off. And so walking that sort of middle path felt really foreign, and it didn't feel good enough. It felt like it was not hardcore enough, And so I had a lot of resistance around that, but I also realized that I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. So yeah, I feel lucky, and I know it's kind of fucked up to say, but I feel lucky that I didn't do my first diet till I was 24. Most people most women especially do their first diet like 12 or 15 or 8 even, And so we do see some of that stuff. I just feel really lucky that I did have a fine relationship with food up until that point.
Yeah. And similarly to you, I grew up with a single parent, and, I was the one cooking oftentimes before my mom came home and taking care of my brother. And I was an athlete as well. I played lacrosse in high school and went on to play in college. And I don't know if you experienced this in college at all, but yes, there was a ton of eating because we were training 4 or 5 hours a day, but there's also a lot of drinking, right? A lot of alcohol, and that would spur cravings and binges and the hangover food and guilt and shame and the Sunday scaries, which then would lead to more deprivation. And so, similar to you, is I had this overeating pattern. Well, yeah, as an athlete, but overeating pattern also as a child because I grew up in an Italian household. So it was like, if you're not unbuttoning your pants at the dinner table, something is wrong. Okay. Like you're insulting
Right.
the chef, or, you haven't eaten enough. And so I took these overeating patterns with me into my teen and 20s and into alcohol and drinking. And
Totally.
yeah, a lot of the clients we work with, they were started Weight Watchers at 10 years old or 12 years old. Their parents commenting on their bodies, their parents, should you be eating that, or you're not eating enough, right? And I think parents always have the best intentions, of course, but they don't realize the impact that it has at such an early age. And so what we do at Laura Cavallo Coaching is we just have clients look back at that. Just, are there patterns from the past that are still coming up? Where is the truth behind that, right? Where are those dots that are still happening in present day? And so for a lot of people, that's a big aha moment, like, holy shit. Yeah.
This actually isn't the truth. This is just literally someone said something to me when I was 10, and I've just carried it now for 20 years. Like, is that even true? We talk a lot about this. I have a podcast called the Best Life Podcast, and Danny and I talk about this quite a bit because we have very similar stories. And, it would be like one comment that even, it doesn't have to be a parent. It can be like especially because kids just say whatever on their mind. Danny was telling a story about how she was sitting next to a girl on the bus when she was like 8. And the girl just pointed out, look how big your legs are compared to my legs. And so then, as an 8-year-old, you don't have the discernment ability, the mental development to go like, that's fucked up, or, that doesn't mean anything, or this is muscle, or, you know what I mean? You don't have that sort of insight. And so she took that on and said, like, she would always sit down. Anytime she would sit down into adulthood, she would like kind of point her toes and like be on her tippy toes so her legs wouldn't like smash on the chair and look like, you know what I mean? Like kind of a pancake. And so it's just these weird things that we then carry into. And she was like, I didn't even wear shorts until I was 35 because I was so insecure about my legs. When in actuality, and this is interesting, and this is kind of, I'm sure you get this too on social media, I talk a lot about body obsession and food obsession and things like that through Moderation 365. And I'll talk about, I have big legs and big muscular legs and stuff. And now at 41, yeah, like they're big legs, but it's not a trigger point for me. Like it used to be 15 years ago or as a child or whatever, growing up an athlete, you have an athlete's body. And I grew up with a lot of friends that were like really skinny, And so I carried that idea of, wow, my legs are twice the size of my peers. And that was the truth at 12 years old. But now at 41, it's actually not that rare. And so I'll get people say, your legs aren't even that big. And I'm like, yeah, I know they're not now, but like you're still carrying the story of that 12-year-old girl who feels like something is wrong with her and not having. And so I think the work that you're doing to sort of like elucidate some of these old narratives around body or around food or around exercise, so many of us don't even stop to think like, where'd that come from? Or do I want to rewrite that story until maybe, we listen to a podcast like this and we're like, oh yeah, I do have some like really fucked up stuff that I've been telling myself. Why am I even telling myself it's actually not true anymore? And so I'm glad that you brought that up.
Thank you. And so when you were doing your competitions for those 6 years, did anyone reach out out of concern, family, friends, partners, like, is this a healthy place for you to be? Or was that just sort of accepted as part of the physique competition culture that you were in?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And the answer is both. So I did have family who was like, this is weird. Like I remember one time on Thanksgiving, I went to the gym 3 times. Like I went first thing in the morning, like on Thanksgiving, like I'm with my family all day. I go to the gym in the morning and then I go right before we eat and then I go after we eat. 3 times to the gym on Thanksgiving Day. And I remember my mom was kind of like, that's weird, but I think she didn't want to like, sound like she didn't want to like criticize me. But she was like, that's kind of strange. And for me at the time, I was like, she just doesn't get it. She's not on the level that I'm at. She doesn't understand the dedication. It's just like, she's not hardcore. She doesn't understand the pressure of having to look a certain way, right? Like she's in her 50s at the time. Like, so it's all these kind of stories you tell yourself. So that's sort of one example. And then I remember this other side. I was visiting my parents. They lived in Boston. I was in North Carolina. I came up and I had like this Tupperware of cold ground turkey. And then I had like a separate like can of salsa. And my mom and I went to the mall and I was like, okay, really quick, I need to eat this. So we're like in a mall parking lot. We like open her trunk. I'm sitting in the back of her trunk and I'm mixing this salsa jar with this Tupperware of like cold, 1% fat ground turkey. And I'm like eating it. She's sitting like waiting for me. And she's literally like, this is so weird. And I was like, what? What do you mean this is weird? I'm just prepared, right? I just have to have my food with me. Now looking back, it's like, fine, but looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was dysfunctional, and so I think the people in my life saw it as sort of strange, but also allowed for me to have my process. And I think I'm so grateful for that because now we can look back and sort of laugh at some of those moments, but also I didn't feel super judged. I just felt like they don't get it, and so, yeah, there were definitely moments like that. I remember my ex-husband actually, I was sitting there and I was actually getting my master's in nutrition and I'm like at the computer, I'm at the kitchen table working and I'm just feeling so upset because I was feeling like just really bloated and I feel like you can't see my abs and I was getting ready for a show. And I remember like crying at the kitchen table and my ex-husband just said, Jill, you have so much else. Like you're a great writer. You're so smart, but you can't see outside of your body. And the same thing, right? Same thing. I was like, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. He doesn't understand I'm trying to win these shows. I'm trying to get my pro card and I'm trying to do all these things. But now looking back, that was amazing advice. That's the advice I would give one of my clients to say, hey, let's diversify your affirmation, right? Let's not just put all of our eggs into this one physique basket, which is exactly what I was doing. And here I am like getting my master's, have an amazing job. I'm getting ready to start the Jill Fit blog and be a writer and do all this other stuff. And I couldn't see those things as valuable. Only my physique was the thing that I brought to the table. And now looking back, I'm so grateful for that advice. But yeah, so there were things like that. But again, I don't think that I was in a position to hear it, which is always one of the hard things about doing a podcast like this is like, you have to be open to the message, right? Like if I wouldn't even have listened to a podcast like this when I was deep in my food and body obsession, because it was like, oh, these people don't get it. They're older. They've sort of given up, like I had that mentality. But once you also get to the point of looking for something else, then you kind of start to see, oh, maybe there are alternatives. And maybe there are people that I can look up to that can be mentors who didn't just let themselves go, who still are able to eat mindfully, still look fit, still have all the things. Maybe there is another path for me. And so again, it's one of those things where like, I love that we're having more and more of these conversations. I'm seeing it so much more than I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I needed it. But at the same time, I wouldn't have been available for that conversation probably.
Yeah. And I think part of that is also, to your point, not a lot of people are talking about it on social or weren't at that time. So for someone to come on and say, I'm binging and depriving, be like, wait.
We would just be like, it was so taboo. and you just felt so alone. And that's really sort of the shame comes in. And I remember just feeling so embarrassed after I would gain back this weight. I would get dieted down. I would do all these modeling shoots, and I had all these magazine covers and stuff. And then I would just like gain this weight back and go underground and just feel like so ashamed and lonely. Like, where are people talking about this now? Of course, with social media, so many people talking about rebounding and it's not your fault and it's your physiology and stuff like that. But back then, all you saw was Oxygen magazine and some of these fitness magazines with these women who you only saw in that very like top tier shape being like, it's not hard. Just be consistent. Just eat chicken and broccoli. What's the big deal? And you're going, I fucking can't just keep eating chicken and broccoli. Like, I want to dive headfirst into a pan of brownies. But you had to keep that inside because you felt so alone and you're like the only one it's happening to. Come to find out 10 years later, it's like so fucking common. And most people have had that experience. But I remember when I started talking about those, I have this blog on JillFit called What It Feels Like to Regain Weight You've Lost. And that was like one of the most shared and most read and best received blogs I had ever written because it was so vulnerable. And someone was just like, this is the exact inner dialogue that I've had. And so I think I'm so grateful now that we're having these conversations. And I really credit Brene Brown with her work around vulnerability and eradicating shame and really having those like open, honest conversations and realizing that there are no new stories. And probably all of us have experienced these emotions in some way. But if you don't talk about it and you don't expose yourself to conversations like this or follow people on social media who are willing to help you have a level of self-compassion, encourage you to do that, you're going to keep feeling alone. You're going to keep feeling like it's your fault. And when I say that, I mean, I am a marketer, but I do blame marketing for a lot of this. A lot of times people just get into these patterns because they feel like they have to, because of the messages that they see, because of the magazine covers and the things like that. And so when you kind of pull it away and you just go, this is the way it is, it's not your fault, then you can actually change it.
Yeah. And I still find that women are vying for that look. Even when they're coming in and they know we're not going to count calories, we're not going to count macros, we're looking. Yeah. They're like, those abs, right? And that physique but not too bulky, right? Just lean enough. Right. And so I still feel like women are, we're still seeing a lot of images of women that are counting macros and training 5-6 days a week for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And I think that we, in the moderation space, need to keep showing up for these women and telling them what it does take to get there, right? And what it does take to have more of a balance. And in your opinion, do you feel like the competition industry has gotten to a healthier place at all? Or do you feel like it still breeds these unhealthy behaviors, this unhealthy obsession, this obsession with body image as well?
I think it's still the same in terms of like this desire to have this physique. I do, and I hate to say it because I don't love this show or what, I'm not like crazy about this family, but the Kardashians, I feel like have done a really good job of making these more like curvy. Of course, I think most of them are like losing a ton of weight right now, but these like more curvy looks, like big butts, like when I was growing up, it was like, you need to have a small pancake ass. You need to have tiny, skinny run model legs. It's, it was what, heroin chic, like that was the look. Now it's like, yes, you want to have more of an athletic look or a fit look or lean curves or whatever. Like, so I think that is more mainstream. And of course, we're just seeing it more, right? Social media has just made it more available to see more people. Before social media, the only bodies you saw were the people you knew locally in your area. So now we're just seeing more examples of what it looks like to be a fit, athletic woman with healthy curves, I think. So I really love the fact that we're seeing more examples of that. In terms of the competition space, I think in some ways they've created more sort of categories. And so there are like quote unquote softer categories now, but it's actually making the other categories more hard. Does that make sense? So like they're all getting harder. But I do think that we have come a long way in terms of managing weight rebound. So for example, like the term reverse diet never existed when I was competing. Like that was just not a thing. It was just basically like you get off stage and like hope you can like white knuckle it and like not binge, and I actually, who I mentioned before, Danny J, my podcast co-host. So whereas I binged, she was actually a national level competitor and she didn't binge at all. She stayed on a competition diet for 7 years straight. She would just literally get off stage and keep eating the same thing for 7 years straight till she put herself in complete adrenal fatigue, gained 30 pounds in like a month and was forced to take like years off from exercising. I never got to that point. I certainly had a more compromised metabolism because of all the yo-yo dieting, just putting so many miles on my metabolism. But I never got to the point of like adrenal fatigue, metabolic damage sort of level, but massive like
Yes.
psychological implications, right? Massive, just like, just weird view of food and exercise and just not seeing outside of that. And it's easy to just justify all of your behaviors by saying people aren't disciplined. I'm disciplined. No one else is disciplined. So I do think that we are way more responsible in the competition space now because we just have more information about what's healthy and what's not healthy. And so I do think that there can be these people who are career competitors, right? They do this their entire lives for like 20 years, and they can do it safely because they are managing their calories, their macros, and they are doing reverse diets and staying in maintenance for a time. For me, I was never in maintenance. I was either 20 pounds up or 20 pounds down. That was it, like multiple times within a year. And so now we're seeing people say, hey, you have to be in maintenance for a period of time, maintain metabolic flexibility, right? Like have more balance in your life, be able to enjoy food. And then when you're ready to cut, let's do it in a safe way and let's do it in a slow way. And so I do think because there's just more information and there's more examples of people using those methods. I mean, I wasn't counting macros back in 2005. That wasn't a thing. It was basically like old bodybuilding wives' tales. Eat chicken and broccoli for every single meal, like froze tilapia and asparagus and stuff like that. And you just ate the right, quote unquote, the right foods. You weren't counting anything. It was just like, these are the only foods, these 12 foods, the only things you can eat. So I think now we're seeing a lot of, and also like food preparation and flavoring and all that kind of stuff has come a long way too. I mean, I wasn't putting salt on anything. There were no, what is
Flavor
that?
God?
What's those
Flavor
ones
God?
now? Yeah, there's no flavor God back then, right? You're just using like lemon pepper and everything tastes like lemon pepper. I was putting Splenda on my white rice. Like it was the worst. So yeah, it's definitely come a long way. I think there are way more resources to do it safely these days.
That is good. And I've heard a lot about reverse dieting and maintenance. And I didn't realize that you weren't counting macros back then. You were just like, these are the 12 foods allowed and good luck.
And you just cut your portions down as you got closer to show. Yeah, you increased your cardio and cut your portions down. You're like went from 6 meals a day to 5 meals a day or 4 meals a day or, cut your portion of like little, chicken like this big. I remember it'd take like 30 seconds to eat and I'd be still be starving. Be like, all right, only 2 hours and 59 more minutes till I can eat again.
Yeah. Doesn't sound fun.
But you know what, though? You just take it as gospel. I think that's the thing, too, is you just go, well, that's just how you get lean. You don't question it. At least I didn't question it. So I think we're seeing a lot of different ways to be successful now, whereas before it was kind of just like you just did what the pros did.
So what was your aha moment going from this food obsession, body image driving, what you were doing to Moderation 365? And what was that process like?
Yeah, so I had like a couple of aha moments. The first and probably the most important was, for me, it was sort of an endless calendar of start dates. Like, so when I did my first show, I would step off stage and say, what's my next show, right? What's my next show? So it was this, I was either on or I was off. It was like, when's your start date? When are you starting your diet? And so everything was like, oh, and then the diet will be over. And then you have another start date. So when your entire sort of life or food life revolves around start and stop dates, you always have something you're working towards. And I like that, to be honest, as someone who was a perfectionist, right? It just like was goal setting and you could justify it however you wanted to. It felt like very organized. And it was in 2011 and I had been dieting for about 9 months straight. I had a couple of shows and then I had maybe like a series of like maybe 5 or 6 photo shoots. And so I literally was on a diet for about 9 months. And I remember it was like not working anymore as it should have been, right? It just more cardio, more cutting. And I was craving nonstop chocolate every second of the day, thinking about sweets and hungry and starving. And I did my last photo shoot that I had planned. And at that point, I had decided I wasn't going to compete anymore. And so I was like, okay, Jill, no more dates on the calendar. How are you going to do it? What does eating healthy forever look like? And I remember exactly where I was. I was in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is where I lived. And I was walking across campus, which is at the university I worked at. And I was like, okay, Jill, you got to figure this out. And what does that look like? And I remember that next week, I had done meal prep, like Sunday food prep for like, I don't know, probably 7 years straight, every single Sunday, like never miss a Sunday. And I just said, I'm so sick of this diet food. Like I can't, it's so disgusting to me. I hate it. I'm just not grocery shopping this week. And I said, even if I gain 50 fucking pounds, I do not care because I just can't eat that stuff. And I was like, well, here we go. I'm probably going to end up McDonald's 3 times a day. Like, I just didn't know. I didn't trust myself at all. And I went throughout the week. And it wasn't perfect, but I would have like more protein shakes as meals and protein bars and some of these more convenience foods, like whole food salads. Like, again, it wasn't like quote unquote diet. It wasn't a competition diet, but it also, I didn't go off the rails. And I got to the end of that week and I was like, wow, you made it without prepping your food. You got to the end of the week, your clothes still fit, and like nothing bad happened. And I really needed that show of evidence that I could trust myself without having all of my things, right? All my Tupperwares and my perfect food in my kitchen and all that kind of stuff. And I got to the end of that week and I was like, oh, this actually could work. I'm never doing food prep again. Honestly, Laura, that's probably the last time I did food prep was in 2011 and cooked food. And so I think that's one of the hardest things about this journey. And I'm sure you work with clients like this too. They need to have all of their ducks in a row all the time to feel successful. And that was me. And so it was this moment of sort of, you have to have this very vulnerable moment. For me, it was like, I don't care if I gain 50 pounds, I just can't keep doing what I'm doing. I got to that point, right? The breaking point. And then you have to give yourself or have that little bit of courage to give yourself the experience of seeing that another way exists. And so for me, that first week of not prepping my food, not having anything ready, nothing in Tupperwares, and I just survived the week and my clothes, I didn't like gain 50 pounds. That was like, okay, wow, maybe I could do this. And so you have to create that show of evidence. That was definitely one of them. The next one was maybe a couple of years later. I was still doing a good amount of cardio. I had sort of mastered the moderate eating, but I was still doing like excessive cardio. I would say like, 1 to 2 hours a day. And it was just draining, exhausting. And for some reason, I felt like I needed to keep it up. And I was going through some stuff in my personal life. And I actually just booked a trip to Europe. And if you've ever been to Europe, like there's not gyms on every corner. And so I literally was there for 9 weeks and I didn't exercise one time. And I sort of had to rip the Band-Aid off. I walked a ton, ate moderately. I came back like a little bit softer. My clothes still fit. So it's like one of those things where you have to give yourself over to the experience. So for me, that was definitely a breakthrough moment too, of going, okay, I don't need to have all of this exercise. And then you just ask yourself, why was I doing all the exercise anyway? I still look the same. And so your metabolism, and this is something we forget, the metabolism is so intelligent. It will definitely compensate. And if you just give it what it wants, which is regular old eating, whole foods, like normal amount of exercise, normal amount of stimulus, like plenty of walking and restorative activity and sleep, it will work itself out. Like it will maintain its flexibility and it will give you what you want. But so many of us push on, I call it like leveraging metabolism. Like we just push on it and push on it and push on it to the point where like every single tiny thing affects it. So if you've ever heard someone say, oh, I can't even look at bread. I can't even look at a carb. I gain weight if I even look at a carb. Chances are they probably do, only because their metabolism is so leveraged. It's to the point where, yes, if you eat a roll and butter, like you probably will actually start to feel a little bloated because your metabolism is not flexible enough. And so you have to and that's where sort of the reverse dieting comes in and some of that stuff. And for me, I just was like, I'm going to Europe, eat bread, cheese, walk a ton, drink a bunch of wine, come back soft and out of shape, but definitely not the 200-pound balloon I thought I was going to be.
That was your reverse diet.
That was it.
Just go to Europe.
Just walked my ass off, slept, laughed, had a good time.
Exactly. You took that pressure off your metabolism and stress.
Finally, my cortisol is responding normally again.
So around that time, is that when you started documenting your process around abundance and scarcity and preemptive cheats and some of these things that you share in your Moderation 365 course? And what was your process like to kind of get to a point where you're like, I need to teach this to people. People need to know about this.
Yeah. So, if you're listening to this and you're going, God, I would just love to have a normal relationship with food. Like that sounds so good or sounds so easy. It took me 3 full years actually to make this transition from very all or nothing eating to what we now call Moderation 365, which is essentially eating moderately every single day, right? We teach people, our tagline is learn how to eat the same on Saturday that you do on Monday. And the idea behind that is that you not only minimize the amount of mental energy you're thinking about food, but also the amount of time. Because my experience was food is a full-time job. I was either making food, eating food, washing dishes after prepping food, or thinking about food all day long. And so I realized, especially when I started my business, that was sort of the catalyst, was like, I can't afford for food and exercise to be a full-time job. Like if I want this thing to be successful, I can't be at the gym 3 times a day. And so that was a big catalyst, but it took me from 2011 to 2014 to make the full transition myself and to feel like, okay, I trust myself in any scenario. I can travel, I can go on vacation, I can go to someone's house, I can go to happy hour, and I can manage it, and I can make a healthy-ish choice. And what I started asking myself was, let me reverse engineer this process. What am I doing? What helped me? And a lot of us don't think that. We're just like, oh, I'm just better now. For me, I started thinking to myself, like, what was that? And so that when I had that conversation with myself in 2011, okay, Jill, like, you got to figure this out for good now. No more diets, no more shows, no more photo shoots. How are you going to eat healthy forever? That's when I came up with the concept of what we call now preemptive cheats. I know some people don't like the word cheat, but preemptive cheats, which to me, we just call choosing the middle or choosing a middle ground. And so we call it navigating the middle, is like going out to a restaurant or even making food at home and having it not have to be quote unquote perfect, but putting a little bit of what we call satisfaction factor on that meal. So for example, if you're used to eating like egg whites and I don't know, veggies for breakfast, throw in a yolk, right? Or even if you're used to eating like maybe a couple eggs and steamed, vegetables, put a little butter on your, veggies. So it was these small things, little sprinkle of cheese on something, like couple squares of chocolate. And I always laugh that like people say, just have a couple squares of chocolate. Like I actually am that person who can have a couple of squares of chocolate and be satisfied now, but not back then, right? If there was even chocolate in like 100 foot radius of me, I would just be eating it till it was completely gone. And so I had to reverse engineer sort of the things that I was doing for myself. And we started this with our one-on-one clients. We're like, let's try this. And so we actually started helping some of our one-on-one clients at the time at JillFit incorporate some of these practices and get their feedback and started almost like beta testing some of the tools. And so now we have, this whole system that we use, like preemptive cheats, intermittent sampling. We have, satisfaction factor. We talk about abundance mindset. We talk about food FOMO, situational eating, stuff like that. And so then I put out a course. My very first course was direct to consumer. It was called Food Obsession Bootcamp in 2014. And it was just a 4-week education in breaking obsessive food patterns. So it's actually not a weight loss course. It wasn't promising weight loss or fat loss or anything like that or body change. It was like, look, this is for someone who, like me, is completely obsessed with food and doesn't want to be anymore. That was it. So we didn't promise any sort of body change, which was risky in 2014, right? A lot of people were like, no one was putting out something like that. And so if you're like, will I lose weight? I was like, you're probably gaining a couple of pounds actually. So
I'm out.
But that was part of the process. And so we taught that, had about 2,500 people go through that individual course. And then in 2020, we put together the certification to teach other pros.
Wow. That's amazing. And it is. But you would say that you started talking about mindset around food maybe as one of the first.
2011, 2012. And the blog was such a great way to do that because you could just like test out an idea, right? It wasn't like I'm not putting out a course on it or, you're just like, hey, let me share something that's been working for me. And then you get feedback and people are like, oh, I tried that thing. I think one of our earliest posts was like, it was literally called like I'm not hard, my eating isn't hardcore or something like that. And it was like, cool, let me just test out some of these tools with our readers.
Yeah. So this transition from tracking every bite of food, food obsession, food choices determining how you look, to a more flexible moderation approach, how are you able to relinquish the control over, I don't know how my body's going to look, A, but also B, how did you get to the point of your body isn't the only way that you can determine your worth and your self-confidence?
So one thing to remember is that confidence is area specific, which means that we tend to feel most confident in the areas in which we've had wins. So up until that point, some of my biggest wins were around my body, right? I'm getting up on stage, I'm winning shows. I don't know, who's to say? Maybe I'd done a show and came in last. I'd be like, yep, not for me, right? So I'm going to find another hobby. But when you do well at something, right, you tend to be more passionate about it. And so in order for me to find other places in my life where I felt useful, where I felt worthy, where I felt like I could make a difference, I needed to then go get reps in those areas. And so for me, part of that happened a lot with my job. When I started JillFit in 2010 as a blog, I started getting affirmation from my writing. I started getting affirmation from my information. I started getting my clients' results. I started reaching people and being able to work with people all over the world. And now all of a sudden you're starting to feel like, wow, I'm actually making an impact, but it's not because I need to have a 6-pack. I'm getting clients' results. They're signing up to work with me, even though I don't look like I'm quote unquote on stage. And you're starting to see that there are other ways in which you can make an impact or have a purpose in the world outside of just how you look. And so if you're in that space where you feel like your body's the only thing you have to give, you have to actively go search out something else. And it could be something as simple, it doesn't have to be starting a business, but it could be something as simple as, I don't know, having a hobby and being like, I'm going to learn this thing and become a better artist, or I'm going to write a novel, or I'm going to, start journaling. For a lot of people, we see this with moms, their purpose becomes their kids. So a lot of them will say, and as it should, right? But they will say like, oh, I got over my body obsession once I realized I had, small humans to raise. And so then they take on that becomes their purpose. I have so much more in my life that I'm here to do. And so I think you have to actively start searching that out. Now, the question of like, how can you be okay, when I kind of joked about like, you might gain a couple pounds in this process, that is true. Not everyone does. In fact, some people actually, I think on average, people will lose weight, to be honest. And that was my experience, was like I gained an initial like 5 to 7 pounds. And at that point, I wasn't really weighing myself a ton, but I was like, yeah, like now I'm just getting up to maintenance, right? Now I'm like at my set point. My body like likes to be here, but my cravings went down a ton. My hunger went way down, and I was doing way less exercise. And I never believed that when people would say that. They're like, if you just cut down, like I remember my ex-husband would be like, Jill, if you just cut your exercise down, you probably won't be like wanting to eat chocolate 24/7. I'm like, you don't know. I've always been hungry, especially as an athlete, right? You're just starving all the time. And so I didn't believe that would work for me until I went to Europe. And I was like, wow, I have no appetite. Like literally I'm walking all day, no appetite, right? Because I'm not doing the massive amounts of cardio, and I'm at the gym 3 times a day. And so the concept of, I think the question you asked really is, they're really linked. When you have other things in your life that you're excited about and you feel like you're good at, it's okay. You kind of, I don't want to say you let yourself go, but you're kind of are less fixated on this one thing. To have only one thing you think you're good at or that you can contribute to the world is really fragile. Like, because what if that thing goes? And I learned this again with my relationship when I got divorced. That was a big piece of it too, was like, oh, like my relationship can't be the thing that I'm good at either, right? It can't come affirmation. We have a great relationship. We have a good marriage. And my ex-husband was also very like a public figure type of guy. And so there was a lot around we're this power couple and like, whatever. And so when I didn't have that anymore, again, life just gives you the lesson that you need. For me, it was first in body, then it was relationships. And so if you don't do the self-worth work in one of the areas, it's going to just follow you to the next area of your life. And so that's why I'm a big fan of like diversifying your sort of affirmation portfolio, having all of these other things in your life that have meaning to you, so that if one of these things goes sideways, like your body, right? You're like, okay, I used to be wearing a size 6 and now I'm wearing a 10, and that just seems to be where my body wants to stay. You have other things in your life that give you meaning and that give you purpose. And also realizing that you gaining 5 or 10 pounds doesn't actually change your life at all. Your friends and family still love you. Your partner probably still wants to have sex with you. Like your job, you still have your job. You're not going to lose your job. Now, if you gain 100 pounds, maybe your life changes. But for most of us, we're scared of gaining like 10 pounds, 20 pounds. Your life doesn't really change at all logistically when you do that. And so, I don't know, you get to that point where, and maybe this is just me over 40 kind of talking, I don't know, there's just so many more things I want to give my attention to and give my bandwidth to besides my body at this point.
Yeah. And I recall one of your quote cards or tweets on Instagram that you reposted. It was like, if you want to stop being obsessed about your body, just get obsessed about something else, right?
Just other shit you're excited about.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a lot of the women we work with who food is this all or nothing, and this impacts so much about them and within their day to day, they become so hyper focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's every breakfast, lunch, and dinner, every food choice, every bite is the end all be all.
And it's not, right? Like, and you know that, like what we think it is. We put all these decisions on these pedestals, and we're so granular with everything. When if you look at the average person who sort of is able to maintain their weight, look good, stay healthy, be balanced, they're not looking at every decision throughout the day with this like micro lens. They realize that the metabolism responds and it's flexible, and you can have if you have a flexible metabolism, you can withstand a couple weeks off from the gym or a few days of shitty eating. You don't look like a different person. But if you have that very leveraged metabolism, yeah, you have a couple of days of eating pizza, man, you're going to be looking different. So it's like, okay, instead of having a fast metabolism, can we have a flexible metabolism that actually continues to just adjust and respond? And the thing that does that is you have to get away from like the restrictive dieting, right? You have to, and also weight train, which is a big piece of what we teach at JillFit, is like giving yourself the opportunity to have a more flexible metabolism through having more muscle mass on your body. Because, it's a great detoxifier. It's the most metabolic organ we have. And so that actually, I always say that the more muscle you have on your body, the more you can get away with nutritionally. But for women, I know sometimes that can be a little bit tough to want to put on muscle.
Yeah. And that happens by, not hyper obsessing about every bite of food. That comes by, to your point, getting those wins and giving yourself the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to sit in this discomfort or this new process or this moderate way of eating, this satisful way of eating for a month or 2 months or 3 months. And I'm just going to try it because what I've been doing hasn't been working, right? So I need to at least give myself the shot, the chance to get some reps, to build those skills, to see if I can be successful in this. And
Totally.
It's not linear, right? You're going to have some successes. 1 week, you're probably going to eat a little bit more consistently than maybe a week when you're traveling, right? But then when you're traveling or you're more stressed or the kids are sick, that's an opportunity to actually practice those skills and learn and adapt to the challenges that life brings you, right? Because at the end of the day, life is going to happen. You're not going to be cooking every single meal at home. You're not going to be not stressed. So that's also a big thing that we teach.
Well, that's the irony, right? Is that like we think that if we like can control the way we eat and we make all of our food and we have our Tupperwares, we do meal prep and we eat everything out of our own kitchen and we never go to someone's house, we never go out to eat, or we never go on vacation, we believe that that's control. That's a really fragile version of control, right? The ultimate in control would be to be able to go anywhere, anytime, and trust yourself to make a healthy-ish choice, right? And so that's why we always talk about this idea of control versus trust, like trusting yourself around food or trusting yourself in certain situations. Like to me, that's the highest order of control is what you're describing, which is, being able to enjoy your life, but then also be able to make those decisions when things are not perfect. Which is why a lot of people, and I hate this, but this is what diet culture does. It's like, oh, I'll start on Monday. I'll start when things slow down. I'll start at the first of the year. And I was that person, right? It was all about start dates. And when you keep putting off learning these skills, when I say skills, I'm like, you have to practice these skills, things like, moderation, mindfulness, like abundance, like they're actual skills that you can get better at. But you can't keep putting them off because you're like, when things settle down. They've actually shown in research that things never settle down. And so what better way to service yourself than to start learning and practicing when life is hectic? Because then when things, if they do settle down, it's like, wow, imagine how much easier it's going to be. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a perfect time. It's funny with moderation. We have people who say, you know what, Jill, I tried moderation. It just didn't work for me. And I understand that that's their experience. However, it's not one of these things where it either works or doesn't work. It's always, to me, moderation and mindfulness it's the end game. You know what I mean? It's like the end game. So you might have to go through a period of abstaining. If you're familiar with Gretchen Rubin's work, she has this like moderators versus abstainers. Some people will just say, well, I have to abstain from, I can't even be around French fries. I can't be around chips. I just, it's just one of the foods, a trigger food. Can't have it around me. And fine. Yeah. Maybe you don't go buy at the store, but like if eventually at some point someone's going to have some fries, and imagine what like a very fragile situation you're in. If you can't literally be around French fries, like how much power are you giving to this food? And so that's why we spend a lot of time helping people expose themselves. We call it exposure therapy, is like expose themselves to the different foods that they're scared of. So I understand that abstaining might work for a time, but in my estimation, it's a stop on the final journey of being able to eat moderately and be able to be around any food anytime and just be fine. Mm-hmm. So when people say it doesn't work for me, it's not really like that. It's more of a skill. It's not like you either slot yourself into it or you don't. It's like, cool, you're saying it doesn't work for you because you're not quite ready for it yet. That's fine. Keep going. So when people say, Jill, I really love the idea of moderation, but I got to just count a little bit. I got to do macros. I'm like, cool, you're not ready. It's fine. Don't rush it. You'll get to the point where I do believe everyone will get to the point where they don't want to count and measure their entire life. Mm-hmm. And at some point they're going to be ready for this. So if they still feel the compulsion to count and measure, and that's how they have to have a sense of control in their life, fine. I don't judge it. It just is. It's where someone is. But I do believe that the final resting stop is moderation and mindfulness.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's so interesting because when we're in like this all or nothing mindset, we're trying to control everything, right? Every detail, every place, every bite of food. And then when you actually get to the other side of satisful nutrition or moderation, you're like, oh my God, I feel so much more in control. This is what I was trying to aim for, but it's on the completely opposite spectrum. And it was just such an aha moment for me where I wanted all this control, and it was like, and then I actually got it by doing the opposite thing, by letting those foods in my diet, by managing my cravings, by not having the good food, bad food mentality, and not letting how I looked drive every decision that I was making with food. Because at the end of the day, food's also enjoyment. It's fun. It's celebration. Like, we want to be able to have some wine. We want to be able to have pie at Thanksgiving and have a maybe more indulgent summer season or something like that, right? And be okay if we're not the leanest all the time.
And what you're talking about is why this is such a tough sell. Like, now that you're on the other side of it, right? You're going, oh, yes, of course. Of course, this is the answer. But when before you've had the experience, you just like can't see how it could possibly work for you, right? Which is why what we do is such a hard sell to somebody, because they go, oh, that would never work for me or whatever. And it's only when they're on the other side of the transformation that they go, oh, I get it now. Yes, this is amazing. I will never do another diet for, I'll never deprive myself ever again. But you need to get there. And one thing you said earlier, I want to just bring everyone's attention back to, which was try it for a couple months, right? Try it for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Give yourself the opportunity. Because I always tell people, like, the calorie restriction isn't going anywhere, right? Macro counting isn't going anywhere. The excessive amounts of cardio is always there for you if you need it. Why not try something like this? Nothing is irreversible, right? I think we get so fixated on, like, especially if you do gain a couple pounds, you're like, well, we're off to the races. Now it's going to be 50 pounds, right? Whereas it's like, no, it's just like, cool. Like, you're recalibrating. You always have a say, right? Every day you can wake up and choose to practice mindfulness, choose to practice moderation, which is why in Mod 365, like, we have actual tools for this. It's not just like, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. It's like, it's an actual tool that we teach you what it looks like in practice, so you can see yourself actually getting better at mindfulness. And then you wake up 6 months from now and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm super mindful around hunger and cravings and energy and all this kind of stuff. Whereas, maybe 6 months ago you weren't. And so that's sort of how it works. And I hate that, because that's the hard thing about it is you only quote unquote get it once you're on the other side of it. Mm-hmm. So that's why, like, the idea of giving people the opportunity to try it, just try it for a month, try it for a couple months. Let's just see. And then they're like, oh yeah, this is awesome, right? And so you have to give them that mentality of like, you can always go back to the old stuff. You need it. But what do we find? 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, they never go back.
It's not so quantitative, like maybe calorie counting, right? Or Whole30 or keto. Eat this, not that. Count this amount of calories or eat this amount of protein. And it's more, again, in tune with what are your hungers and cravings telling you? How are you experiencing this food in this environment? Are you tired? Are you stressed? Have you not eaten in 12 hours, right? And it forces people to pay attention to themselves and what's going on with their bodies. And I think this
usually never do.
Exactly. I think this is so closely tied to just also our American culture of go, 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 ignore yourself for that sacrifice of your family and your career and XYZ. You're invited to the Cravings Cleanup, a free 7-day nutrition challenge to help you stay on track and reduce cravings and mindless snacking by up to 50% guaranteed. You'll work directly with me and learn how to create a satisful breakfast, which is a 4-part guide to building a satisfying yet filling meal that will take you less than 10 minutes to put together and has the power to transform your days from insatiable hunger and constant cravings to less overeating and overall snacking. Follow the link below to learn more and enroll. It's completely free to join, and we start on Monday, April 24th. So how much has your relationship with perfectionism and your type A drive had to shift in order to become better at moderation? Are you still perfectionist type A, or do you feel like you're a recovering type A? That's kind of like how I describe myself, like a recovering perfectionist, because it was so tied to my nutrition and to my value as a person.
Yeah. So a couple things, and you and I've had this conversation before, because I'm definitely that too. And you grow up, especially like, are you the oldest in your family?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's either old or oldest or single children. Like, we just have this like drive to like, we have to be perfect and we have to take on all this responsibility and we're self-sufficient and all these kind of things. And that was definitely me. And, that's, in theory, it's like a really good thing, right? You take responsibility, you're self-sufficient, you're self-starter, whatever. But on the other side of it is that nothing feels good enough. And actually, I read this book. This must have been in like maybe 2011, and it was called Being Happy by Tal Ben-Shahar, who is, I guess, he's like the godfather of positive psychology. And he has two books that were really impactful for me. One was called Happier, and then the other was called Being Happy. Super simple names. Being Happy was all about perfectionism. And I'm reading this book and I'm going, this is me. Like, I'm like, literally, like, I didn't identify as a perfectionist, you know? And I'm like, this is fucking me. Wow. So that was a massive wake up call to be like, and it's not a good thing. Being right is not a good thing, right? So that coupled with starting my business at the same time that I was working in the gym 70 to 80 hours a week, I just couldn't afford to be perfect. If I had to be perfect with every blog having no typos, no grammar mistakes, and like, you know, the most perfect biochemistry, I would never have gotten anything done. And so I think for me, I was willing to sacrifice perfection for progress and for productivity. And so those are sort of two sides of of an opposite coin, which is you can either try and be perfect or you can be productive. And I think I saw, hey, if I really want to figure this thing out and like I really want to get better at this, I'm going to have to ship like, you know, shitty first drafts, and it's going to have to be fine. And what happened was, again, going back to our affirmation conversation, I got affirmation for the imperfect shit, you know? And so then you start to see, oh, okay, yeah, my blogs have these, you know, typos and, you know, grammatical errors. I was blogging every single day. And while it wasn't like something I wanted to, you know, I didn't want to have grammar mistakes and typos and spelling errors and stuff like that in my blogs, it just ended up being the case because I was so proficient. Like I was just literally blogging every single day, prolific. And so I think when you start also seeing that you can get ahead and have success when it's not perfect, same thing with moderation, right? Moderation is not perfect. I have not eaten quote unquote perfect probably since 2010. But when you start to see that, like, wow, I can actually get further ahead from not being perfect, and you have that show of evidence, to me, that was really all it took. Now I'm like addicted to that shit. I will do anything and just be shitty at it because I know that that's going to get me way further than sitting here trying to be perfect and end up being miserable. So I think it was a couple of those things, is having, like you said earlier, the awareness of like, is this me? And being able to have the self-awareness. A lot of people don't even know they're perfectionists. They're just like, I'm not ready. And you're like, or you're perfectionist. It's okay, right? Or you're just procrastinating because you're worried it's not gonna be perfect. It's fine, but you have to have the awareness of like, and that's why I like that book, because it was like a list of shit, and I was like, oh, yep, check, 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 check.
Yep,
so
yep.
For me, it was like having authority tell you that, and then you're going, yeah, and then how is this showing up in my life, and how is it actually being a disservice? You have to also have your eyes wide open to realize that your perfectionism is holding you back, and you have to be very real with yourself and not use it as an excuse to procrastinate or tell yourself that you're not ready. Instead, just say, and to be honest with yourself, it's not a bad thing. It's just like, oh, I'm a perfectionist and I am a sort of control freak. And I really, if I want to get ahead or I want to be successful, I'm going to have to figure out a way around this.
Yeah, and how amazing that with Moderation 365 and Satisful Nutrition, you can eat imperfectly and then you don't end up binging and you don't end up really good during the week and bad on the weekend. And that in itself is success for us, right? How many women are struggling with this daily, and the only thing they want is just to be able to eat one cookie or not binge the whole bag.
But they have to get real with the fact, and this was a big moment for me too. I was doing what I call the deprive then binge cycle every single week. So I would do Monday through Thursday, very good nutrition. Then I would just binge Friday through Sunday every single week. So after doing that for months and months and months, I had to face the fact that this shit wasn't working. Like, because I had the best intention, right? We always go into Monday with the best intention. This is going to be the week. I got my food prepared. I'm going to be better this week. I had to get real with myself that nothing was changing. And so you have to take away the self-judgment and just look at it and not blame yourself. And I think that was hard too. I read a lot about self-compassion. That was like I was focused a lot on self-compassion at that time. And I was like, oh, self-compassion is actually a productivity tool. I could maybe even be more compliant if I just got rid of the mental aerobics I'm doing every single week around like how I'm not good enough and how this is bad and I'm weak and I'm indisciplined. Instead, just look at the facts, which the facts are, what's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and thinking and hoping you're getting a different result. That was me. And so I had to look at the reality of like, wow, what I think is supposed to work keeps not working. It's not a me problem. It's a approach problem. Then I have to do something else. Like you said, like, okay, why not try to have a cookie then? Instead of like white knuckling it and then eating all the cookies on the weekend, why not have a cookie on Tuesday? See what's up, right? Like, and then just practice. And a lot of people have a hard time. This is the preemptive cheats discussion. A lot of times you have a hard time giving themselves that nutritional relief earlier in the week because they go, well, what if I have a cookie on Tuesday and then I still eat all the cookies on the weekend? That might happen. There's a buffer period, right? There is a buffer period where your metabolism is going to have to come back online. It's going to have to get more adapt again. But at some point, this always works. There's going to be a time where you get to Friday night at 5 o'clock after a long day at work and you're like, I don't want to like dive. I'm good. I'm actually good. I don't need to like dive headfirst into a bag of cookies because I'm actually good. And then again and again and again until you're eating the same every single day, no matter what the day is.
Yeah, I'm taking a group of women through the Cravings Code right now, which is my 6-week one-on-one coaching in a small group pod. And a lot of these intake forms from these women where I end up binging at night, everyone's gone to bed, and I'm having all the cookies and the cakes. Or in the afternoon, I'm really tired and I haven't had lunch or breakfast. And then I end up having pretzels, and then it's cookies, and then it's back to salty, and then it's sweet. We're in week 3 of this program. We started with Satisful breakfast within 2 hours of waking. We started with Serve and Go, which is a craving strategy. And their reflection forms this week is, I had a cookie and I didn't feel like I had to have more. The urge to binge is a lot less. I am able to have food around the house and not feel like I have to eat it all, right? And so now these women are getting these wins and they're just seeing that A, it's possible for them, right? And B, it's okay to have a cookie with breakfast on a Tuesday. It's not going to be the end all be all. But in the same light, we've got women that are also like, okay, I'm having this satisful breakfast and then I did binge this afternoon. But to your point, what we're doing is, why did that happen, right? Let's get clinical. Let's get analytical with what happened. And then we break it down. Oh, you didn't really have a satisful lunch, right? Or whatever it was. And so now we're giving these clients the power to get curious and remain flexible with their nutrition approach instead of being like, oh, well, it doesn't work, right? Or I'm a failure, or I told you it wasn't going to work for me. It's just not who I am. But they're reaping the benefits by getting those wins, and week by week, they're building that confidence up.
Totally. And that's the thing I'll never forget. I was giving a talk on Moderation 365 at PaleoFX in 2015. And the talk was actually called Quantifying Moderation, because that's one of the biggest complaints about moderation, right? Is you can't measure it, you can't count it. And you, I know, use biofeedback in your practice, things like hunger and cravings and energy and mood and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what we do in Moderate 365 is we talk about fullness. We have people rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. We have satisfaction factor, which, how satisfying is this meal, 1 to 10. And so there are ways that you can quote unquote quantify moderate eating. But like so many of us just feel like, oh, intuitive eating is just it's too vague. It's too all over the place. And but it's actually not. If you look at a lot of these people who have these complaints about moderation or complaints about intuitive eating have probably never done it successfully. So they go, well, you can't count it. You can't measure it. So it's not going to work. People just go off the rails. And it's actually like most people don't. In fact, probably most people go off the rails after a period of counting and measuring everything obsessively. And I'll never forget, I got off stage and there's a bunch of people who want to chat about their personal situation. And because at that time in 2015, it was pretty people were just like, wow, that was just I've never heard anything like that before. So this woman came up to me and she said, every day after I leave work, tell myself I'm not going to do this, but I always stop at CVS on the way home and I get a pack of Reese's peanut butter cups. And I do it every day and I just get so mad at myself but I end up doing it more times than not. And I was like, what if instead you just plan to have a Reese's peanut butter cup every day? And she was like, what? And I'm like, you're doing it anyway, but you're making a really big deal of it and you're putting it on this pedestal. I think and this is what we call intermittent sampling, it's I think if you instead plan you're just going to have it, now it's not it doesn't have to be this pedestal food where it's I can't have that and it's very illicit. It's literally you just have it and you take it off its pedestal. And so she was blown away. I'm like, you're doing it anyway. Why not just plan for it? Don't beat yourself up. And I swear at some point you probably won't want it or need it because it's not off limits anymore. And that's the idea behind this. And again, one of the hardest sells we have is being I promise it works this way. And they're just I'm supposed to just take your word for it. So that's why I love having people like you who are doing this podcast, Moderation 365, would just give people a lot of opportunities to see what moderate eating looks like. And I think there's this fear of like, if I eat moderately or I allow myself to have these foods, that I'm going to be 400 pounds. And you have to look at people who are living this and go, wow, they actually still look fit and they, are healthy and they didn't blow up because they started this process. I think there's value in that too. And so that's why we need people like you and Mod 365 coaches and people like that who are like showing people like, hey, you actually can still be fit and healthy and look good and fit into your clothes while also doing this practice. People just need to see examples of that.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you on, because not only have you been an inspiration to me, but I believe what you're doing, not just in like business and fitness, but with the nutrition side, you really have been a pioneer for mindfulness and moderate eating and self-acceptance and body image. And you've put it all out there. You've been very transparent and very forthcoming with your challenges and where you are now. And I think you've helped a lot of women just build more confidence in themselves. And, badass women got to stick together. We have to help uplift other women and show them that they have potential to be great and that there's more to life than food and how you look. And there's a whole life to be lived out there. So again, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's my pleasure.
I like to end the podcast with asking you what your favorite crave food is. Like, what is that one thing that gives you the yum yums that you have to have some every day and it's just like your go-to crave food?
Yeah, I mean, chocolate. I know it's like so cliche, but
I'm the same way, girl.
I'm definitely
chocolate.
A stimulants person, right? If you ever done like the Braveman assessment, I'm definitely a dopamine person. So I'm like coffee, wine, chocolate, like just give me all the stimulants. So yeah, for sure. Chocolate's my thing, and it's one of those things where like I have it around all the time. I mean, there's like literally a bar of chocolate out on my counter that's been sitting there for like 3 days. I've been just like taking squares here and there. I could never have done that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? I would tell my ex-husband to like hide food. I'd be like, I want this after my show. Can you go and hide it somewhere so I can't find it? So now it's just, it's just having it available.
Yeah. Like dark chocolate, milk
chocolate, white chocolate.
All the chocolate.
Yeah. People are like, white chocolate isn't even chocolate. I'm like, look.
Ooh.
Yeah. I'm not a milk chocolate person. I don't really love like bitter foods, but I'm definitely a milk and a white chocolate person.
I love that. White chocolate gets a bad rap. I feel like it's like this undercover, like sweet treat that not a lot of people eat, but it's so good. Yeah, and same here. Like chocolate bars did not last in my house past one night. It was like, oh, there's chocolate. Well, we're going to eat the whole damn thing. We're going to put some almond butter on that, and we're just going to binge around 1,000
just get
calories.
Out of the way. Just finish it up so it's not even here tomorrow. Don't even think about it.
Oh, man. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Jill. Before we hop off, tell us where we can find you and how people can connect with you.
Yeah. So if you guys are interested in the content we talked about and some of the tools, you can definitely check out the Moderation 365 Instagram account. It's just at Moderation 365. If you go to jillfit.com and just search our blog for nutrition blogs, there's a ton of just like more in-depth posts on what we talked about, all 100% free. And if you are a professional and you're listening to this and you're interested in learning more about the certification, you can definitely hit me up. Just at JillFit on social media or at Moderation365 on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jill. Have a good rest of your day.